Is Jason Grinblat, and I'm half of the core team of Freehold Games. We work on a roguelike called Caves of Qud. And with that out of the way, let's read some text written by robots. Okay, so these are written by Markov text generators, and I love Markov text generators. I love the way that they produce sentences that would never be written by humans. I love how they produce this well-formed English that's sort of semantically nonsensical, and that to make sense of them, your brain imposes a context that really wasn't intended by the generator. The way they work is that they essentially just rearrange text from a source corpus. So if we go back here, this sentence was actually generated from a corpus of the Puppet documentation. Puppet is system administration software, combined with the assorted works of H.P. Lovecraft, as was this one as well. And then this one was generated from these aggregated LinkedIn recruiter emails combined with personal anecdotes of drug use from Arrowhead.com. Yeah, so the reason they're called Markov text generators is that they're based on these mathematical models called Markov chains, which were developed by a Russian mathematician named Andrei Markov. And like I said, I really love them. For a while now, I've wanted to get them into our game Caves of Qud somehow. And so today I'm going to be telling you about a design experiment where I did just that. So on our quest toward a procedural library in Caves of Qud, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the role of knowledge in Caves of Qud. I'm going to show you how Markov text generators work because they're really simple. I'm going to show you how I generated procedural books. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I tried to move beyond a generator and actually weave a game mechanic around the generated text. Okay, so Caves of Qud. What is Caves of Qud? Some of you might know, some of you probably don't though. So it's an open world, far future science fantasy, roguelike RPG, sort of into the tradition of new wave science fiction. The tagline is chiseled through layers of thousand-year-old civilizations. So if you could imagine for me, if you will, that you're a lore seeker in a wild and savage world, you've just come to the outskirts of this land called Qud, where an irradiated jungle strangles chrome steeples and rusted archways to the earth. You've heard tell, even though it's a wild world, you've heard tell that there are pockets of civilization that are trying to resurrect knowledge from the seeds of the past. So there's the mayor of a mushroom village who happens to be an albino ape, and he has a collection of rare books. And there's a clan of cave bears who are called the Barathamites, and they're trying to meticulously resurrect the glory of ancient technology. But greater than all, deep in this salt desert, there's a sect of machine worshippers who have built a cathedral, and they're founding Qud's first library in 500 years. And so spurred on by your love of knowledge, you quest over to the library. So I really wanted this library to feel like this ancient place that was a collection of texts from across the ages. So, the authors are gone, the context is lost. Things like lingual drift and transliteration have rendered the text either indecipherable or only semi-decipherable. The meaning is fractured and fleeting. You're reading words whose meanings you don't know, and you're reading about things that you may have only heard of as myths as a child. And I realized this sort of weird fractured text is a perfect fit for Markov-generated text. So let's talk a little bit about Markov chains. All right, so they're a probabilistic model for describing a series of states. The important property about them is that the next state depends only on the current state, not on all the previous states. And this short memory property of the chain is what allows it to walk through your corpus and generate this interesting varied text. So for text generators, the states are sequences of words. And like I mentioned, Markov chains are built from a source corpus, and that corpus can be anything from, multiple books, like in the case of the assorted works of H.P. Lovecraft, or it could be a single sentence. So I'm going to show you how to build a chain from this sentence, just the cat isn't sleeping, but the cat isn't sleeping, but the cat is definitely not listening. So the way you build the chain, you basically build the chain one piece at a time. And each of the pieces is called an n-gram. An n-gram is just a series of n units. And in this case, the units are words. I'm also going to call it a prefix because I'm going to be talking about it in the context of the word that immediately follows it, which will be the suffix. So the number of units in your n-gram, or the number of words in your n-gram in our case, is called the order. And the order is a property of the chain, and you can vary the order to change how predictable the text is that you end up generating. So if your order is big enough, you would just reproduce the text that was originally in your corpus. And for the text generator I wrote for Caves of Qud, and for the example I'm going to show you here, the order is 2. Okay, so what do we do? So the first thing we do for building the chain, we're going to basically look at the first n-gram, the first prefix, which is the cat, and we're going to put it into a dictionary. A dictionary is just a list of key and value pairs. So the key is going to be the n-gram, the prefix, and the suffix is going to be a list, or sorry, the value of the pair is going to be a list containing the suffix. So in this case, the cat and the list containing isn't, which is the suffix. Then we just increment through the sentence. So the next prefix is cat isn't. We add that to the dictionary. We look at what the suffix is. It's sleeping. We add that to the value. We do it again for isn't sleeping. Notice that the comma was actually retained in our processing. That's actually sort of important. We'll get to that. Sleeping but though, we keep going. And then we get to the cat. So the cat we've actually encountered already. So what we do now is that we append the new suffix is to the list that was already the value of the entry for the cat. So now the cat has a list containing 2 suffixes, isn't and is. And then we do it for the rest of the sentence the same way until we process the whole sentence. The way we actually generate text is we choose a prefix to start with. So let's choose the cat. And then we randomly choose from among the suffixes in its list that is associated with the prefix. We randomly choose one of them. So, in this case, we're going to randomly choose is, which is the second one. And then to generate the next word, we do the same thing. We just we push the incrementer along. So now we're going to look up cat is in our dictionary, and we find definitely is the next word, and so we add definitely. And then we do it with is definitely. And for the rest of the words, because there's only one word in each of these lists, it's deterministic, and the sentence we end up getting is the cat is definitely not listening. So let's see here. They're really simple Markov chains to build, and sort of the complexity and what makes them interesting is really the clever arrangement of the corpus, the clever choice of a corpus rather than the rules of actually generating the text. So to talk about a little bit about books in Caves of Qud, so we actually already have a concept of books in Caves of Qud. There are dozens of static books in their game. So there are things like journals, parables, sacred texts, histories. Books are like objects in the game. You can walk up to them, you can pick them up, you can interact with them, you could read their description. Every object in the game is a description. The one unique thing you can do with books is that you could also read them. So we have this read menu, and if you're familiar with, say, like the Elder Scrolls games, and they have in-game books that you could read the lore about the world, they're similar, sort of inspired by that. Like I said, they're mostly static. Some of them have some procedural elements. This one, for example, the Corpus Colis, is a book of procedural cures for diseases in the game. So you can get diseases in the game, and then each game the cure is actually procedurally generated. So you have to reference this manual instead of just looking up the Caves of Qud wiki. Okay, so when I started to think about building a corpus for Caves of Qud and like what text I wanted to include, we have all these static in-game books. So the first thing I definitely knew I wanted to include were all the static books that I had written. We also have things like NPC dialogue, quest text. We have every description on every object in the game. We have descriptions for skills. And then we also have the Caves of Qud help files. So this is really kind of funny because it produces this weird meta-reality where you could find books in the game that are sort of talking about Caves of Qud. So that's on the Caves of Qud side. I also wanted to add some, like I said, the sort of what ends up being interesting about a Markov chain is often just the clever arrangement of the corpus. So I went into Project Gutenberg and I found some public domain works. there's this book called The Machinery of the Universe, Mechanical Concepts of Physical Phenomenon. It's a 19th century physics book. It was written by Amos Emerson Dolbear, whose name I think was procedurally generated. And this book kind of matches the tone of Caves of Qud. There's another book called Zoological Mythology or The Legends of Animals, another 19th century book. So I included excerpts of these such that they made up about half the corpus, and then Caves of Qud made up the other half of the corpus. So Caves of Qud, there's actually like about 45,000 words in Caves of Qud, which is like on the order of a small novel. And so then I had about 45,000 words of, from these excerpts from the public domain works. Okay, so let's actually generate some text. So here's how I generated the text. As I actually build the chain in the manner I showed you earlier, I keep a separate list of all the words that actually start sentences, or all the prefixes that start sentences. I keep those in a separate list. And then when I actually, so for example, in the original, the sample sentence I showed you, the cat isn't sleeping, the cat, I would add that to a separate sentence. To actually generate a sentence, I pick from those candidate starting prefixes randomly. I pick one, and then we choose an n-gram from that list of random. Then we walk the chain until we hit a period. And what I mean by walk the chain is that we just go through that process of generating text like I showed you, of generating the next word, and we go until we hit a period. There's like an extra rule in there about like if you go 50 words and you don't have a period, like then terminate, but that actually very rarely happens. And then very simply, to generate a paragraph, you just generate 3 to 6 sentences. And to generate a book, we generate 8 to 30 paragraphs. And then we had written some formatting tools for our static books, and we just rely on those and the auto formatting to make the books look good. So here's an example of a procedurally generated book in Caves of Qud. I'll just read the first sentence. For ages, the civilizations of the cloneling are comprised of skull-sized hexagonal pyramids of polished chrome. Okay. Some examples that I really like here. Clan Lecrae's sigil is a river just north of the glacial rivers flowing over the bones of a canyon dweller. Press L and scroll around to revel at the black blood for their children's return to the idol of Oborokoro and skulking around it and built a temple there. And some of them are like particularly poetic. So this one I like. It's Titus and like Indris, drinks of water azure and flaking silver of water. But there is a quasar of red metal that gently undulates when seen by day and gloomy by night. The sun goes round and round amidst the worlds. So this was a lot of fun. Like it was especially fun for me to write the generator and have it generate text based on the corpus that I had written. And I started thinking like, who's the author of this text? Is it me? Is it the generator? And Emily Short, who Kate mentioned in her last talk, is this person in the procedural text and interactive fiction world. I had a chance to talk to her at GDC this year, and she told me about this fictional travel guide that she had written, The Annals of the Paraguays, which is really cool. You should check it out. And I like the way she put it. She felt like it was a collaboration between her and the generator, which I thought was sort of a nice way to put the whole enterprise. Okay, so how I generated book titles. Titles were actually more difficult than text because whereas the text that I wanted to generate looked pretty similar to the corpus text I was using, titles have some additional structure. So a bad title, like if I just generate a fragment of text from the chain, you get something like at the foot of a sickly tree until, and that's kind of like a crappy title. So my first idea was to design title-like templates and walk the chain and fill them in. So what I mean by a title-like template, things like the blank of blank, as in the winds of change, or on blank, like on sentimentality. These are templates that I felt would make pretty good titles. So it sort of worked. Here, let's go back here. It worked. Like I wrote some rules to like match the prefixes in the chain to my templates, and then walk through them when I kind of spend some time walking through them. And it generated pretty good titles. But there's actually a bug in the code, and I noticed that it was generating a lot of titles that were not of that form, were kind of slipping through, but they were really good titles anyway. And so that led me to my second idea, which is a much better idea, which is I generate a fragment of text like by walking the chain 2 to 5 times. Uh-oh. What happened? It went. Okay. Yeah, so here we go. Okay. I generate a fragment of text by walking the chain 2 to 5 times, and then I just shave undesirable words off the beginning and end of the text. So examples of undesirable starting words are things like were, though, them, him, like pronouns, conjunctions, some bad ending words are this, were, every. And there are actually not too many. There's something like keep a static list of 30 words that you just shave off the start and end. And then you end up with a title like at the foot of a sickly tree. That's actually a pretty interesting title, right? And it's just the bad title with until shaved off the end. So that method was a lot more productive. So here are some examples in advanced rate, an arm's length from a priest, exclamation point. Here are some of my favorite ones. That one's kind of weird and cool. Like I've said before, I want this book to exist in real life. Yeah. Okay, so if any of you here for Kate's last talk, she actually in her generator blog post that she talked about, so you want to build a generator, she talks about this idea of characterfulness, which is, if you've spent any time writing procedural concepts, you're probably familiar with the idea of sameness, this idea that you might be generating things that are technically different by some technical definition, but as far as how humans perceive them, they kind of get lost and melded together. And so this quality of being able to be like meaningfully perceived as different by a human or by a player or a reader is characterfulness. And so I wanted to make sure my books were characterful. So I did a few things to add character. Like one of the things is 10% of the time I include author's notes or editor's notes. And all an author's note is, it's the word author's note and then a randomly generated sentence. So for example, you get like, that's what the editor wants you to know. Okay. 5% of the time I generate a tome and it's just 10 times as big as a normal book. That's all it is. And then 20% of the time I add some title modifiers. So there's things like nth edition or colon unabridged, or, and this one's my personal favorite title. Okay, so we got the generated text working pretty good. That was cool. We really wanted to evoke the experience of like coming to a library and sifting through tattered tomes and really like researching something that was meaningful in the game world. So I had this idea where we have all these like procedurally, Caves of Qud is a roguelike. There are many aspects of the game that are procedurally generated, and I thought like we could write some lore about those procedural elements and then inject them into the Markov chain. And then when the text was actually, when we would generate text, occasionally it would hit onto these lore elements and then like insert a piece of lore into the books. So as a proof of concept, we did this with the piece of procedural information we were going to use was the location of this artifact pistol called the Ruin of House Eisner. So the pistol is placed on a random map on Qud surface, one of 18,000. So like this is the world map for Caves of Qud. It's 80 by 25 tiles, and each tile is 3 by 3 maps, so there's 18,000. So I did some, when I built the chain from the Caves of Qud corpus, I did some frequency analysis, and I made this observation, which in retrospect is really obvious, but it actually took me a lot of thinking before I got there, which is that how often a prefix occurs in the corpus very closely matches how often it occurs in generated text, at least in the way I was generating text. So hold on to that. We'll get back to that. I'll show you how I use that. But common prefixes are things like in the, with the, of the, to the. These are the prefixes of order 2 that were most common in the chain. Okay, so I wrote a secret generator that basically it generates English secrets about the location of the pistol, and all the secrets take the form of distances from static landmarks in the world of Qud. So there are things like 8 parasangs north of the 6-day stilt, east of Joppa, some 6 parasangs. And a parasang is a unit of measurement that's equal to about 1 world map tile. So the secrets then are prefaced with one of those common prefixes to the, and they take the form of, like, this is an example of a secret. To the masterwork pistol I buried east of Joppa some 6 parasangs. And then I embedded the secrets in the corpus. And then, right, so I actually put them in the corpus, and then I added some special processing rules to the chain so that when the chain's getting constructed, it doesn't crack these secrets apart into units of 2 words, and instead ingests them as the whole secret. So here's an example of, the form it finally took. I'll just read the highlighted part. The ambrosia, which belongs to the other, which gives different properties to the famous revolver, ruin of House Eisner, which I hid somewhere north of Joppa, about 12 parasangs. So, a savvy player can go to the library, do some research, and find a north-south secret, cross-reference it with an east-west secret, and they're able to locate, narrow down the location of the pistol to one of the world map tiles, which is just 9 maps. So, an amount that you can reasonably explore. So if we go back to our frequency analysis, we know a couple of things that we can combine to get a formula for, that might yield some useful information. So we know the size of an average book. We know that just from the way we generate books. We know how often one of our hooks appears per book. And by hooks, we mean the common prefixes that we use, like to the, in the. And we know that because of our observation that however often it appears in the corpus, it's going to appear with about that frequency in the generated text. We also know how many suffixes each of those hooks have. So if we look in the chain at one of the prefixes, like in the, we could look at how large its list is of suffixes, and it'll be like, some 100 maybe suffixes. And by playing with those variables, it turns out we can control the frequency that the secrets appear in the book. So, the math turns out to be, the desired number of secrets per book times the average number of suffixes per hook over the number of hooks per book. And so for Caves of Qud and the feel I was going for, I decided that I wanted a secret on average about every 4 books. Every 4 books you peruse. You could also find books in other encounters outside of the library. You could find them on book merchants and scattered throughout the world. Okay, so that was the proof of concept. Some future work. I would like to add more fluidity to the secret generation. So right now, because the secrets have to take the form of well-formed English to get really meaningfully ingested by the chain and then, spit out by the generator, I have to spend a lot of time crafting the secret generator from the piece of lore. And, there are all sorts of procedural things in Caves of Qud that could be secrets. I would like to have some generalized way to turn those into secrets. I would like to experiment with more corpora, put some more interesting books from Project Gutenberg, or maybe divide the Caves of Qud text into separate corpora so that they could be a little more thematic. I would also I kind of like the idea of generating thematic paragraphs, so adding a little more sophistication beyond just generating X sentences to have a paragraph, do something so that I can have more thematic paragraphs or books. And that's it. I'm Jason Grinblat, Tycho Mantra on Twitter. Are there any questions? Yes, Jim.
When you grab a gram in the beginning, let's say it's a 3 gram, right?
Sure.
Do you then only do 1 at a time afterwards, or do you get 2s and 4s and 2s?
It's just 1. So Jim asked, when you're grabbing the engrams, how do you generate? When you generate the next words, is it always just 1 word at a time, or is it multiple words? And it's just the way I do it. It's just 1 word at a time. Yeah. Yes.
So you talked about. So it sounds like you're adding titles after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, have you thought about weighting words by the proximity to other words somehow, so that you could design your title and then pick words that are sort of related to the title to be slightly more common inside that book? And then
Okay. So it was asked if I've thought about generating a title and then weighting the words that appear in the title to sort of seed the text that comes in the book. Yeah, I mean, I had some thoughts around, just kind of we didn't get to that, but that's an interesting idea. Or doing the opposite, maybe generating some text and then generating a title based on that text. That would be interesting too. Yeah.
Did you consider dialogue either in your game or in your corpus as a meaningful?
So we have So the question was if I considered dialogue in the game or elsewhere as meaningful in the corpus. So So we do have dialogue because I use the dialogue. Are you asking if it was meaningful? Oh, okay, yeah. So I might not have listed it, but we did use the game's dialogue, NPC dialogue, yeah, I did, to put into the corpus. We didn't then use the generator to generate dialogue. We haven't done that yet. The dialogue's all pretty like handwritten. So, but the dialogue contains some interesting information about the game, and it's also interesting because it's from the perspective of people who live in the world, and that often makes for good generated text. Yeah. Yes.
So if you use a dialogue to generate, that means that the books might give out wrong information, right? They can say like a certain item is somewhere completely irrelevant to its actual location. Do you have any mechanisms to avoid that, or is that considered a feature?
Well, it wouldn't. Okay. So the question was, if I'm using dialogue as part of the corpus, then there's the possibility that if NPC says something, or maybe just the way the chain or the generator combines text, that I'll give some false information. The way it turns out is that the false information it gives is like it'll say something completely absurd, like the ruin of House Eisner is like a floating butterfly or something. Like it'll just say it's rare for it to generate something that could be interpreted as right and actually be wrong. So yeah, I didn't give as much consideration to that, but I kind of like the idea of some misinformation as long as it doesn't look too much like the right answer.
You haven't had like any player reports about things being weirdly misleading?
I think most players, so we added this fairly recently because it's a pretty new feature. We actually don't have the library in yet, but we do have procedural books that you could find in various encounters. The players are just like kind of confused. They like read it and like don't know what's the thing. Because the lore of the world itself is sort of like, there's a lot, it's shrouded in mystery, and so people are reading these texts and like, what is going on? That's mostly been the.
That's fine, so.
Okay. Thank you.